Panelists tonight will provide information on management of Mauna Kea since 2000, including the establishment of community-based management of Mauna Kea and Office of Maunakea Management's initiatives and efforts to responsibly steward the 12,000 acres of UH managed lands on Mauna Kea. We will also learn today the UH's path forward in an increasingly challenging social and political climate that requires not just actions, but new ways of thinking about stewardship, planning, engaging, and decision-making while honoring Mauna Kea for generations to come. I want to welcome our panelists here tonight. I would like to introduce them, but before that, let me tell you a little bit about Community Forum. If you are here for the first time, welcome. We are a small private nonprofit organization. We are an all-volunteer group. A couple of our board members are here tonight, and that is Isaiah Heyer back there. He is manning our camera, and Scott Ordway behind me manning our sound booth. And we do have a few others who are not here, Pete Huffman, Mike Matsukawa, and Candy Ellsworth. So to begin, I would like to introduce our panelists. And at some point, so the forum format is we are going to have them do their presentation. I think staff and Greg will have about 15 to 20-minute presentations each, and the rest of the panelists will talk for about 5 to 10 minutes, after which we will open it up to question and answer. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Laura Aquino in the back will give you a index card and a pen so that you can write your questions, and she'll bring it up to me. With that said, I would like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Stephanie Nagata. She is the director of the Office of Maunakea Management and has been with OMKM since its inception in 2000. OMKM, together with the volunteer-based Mauna Kea Management Board and Native Hawaiian Advisory Council, comprises community-based management of the University of Hawaii's managed lands on Mauna Kea. They are responsible for day-to-day management, development of policies, and review and approval of proposed projects, and make recommendations to the President and Board of Regents to approve or disapprove of major telescope projects. Prior to coming to OMKM, Ms. Nagata worked at the Department of Business and Economic Development in Product Promotion Branch. She has a master's in wildlife biology from Colorado State University and master's in business administration from the University of Hawaii. Welcome, Ms. Stephanie Nagata. Our next panelist is Greg Chun. Greg is the current chair of the Mauna Kea Management Board, a volunteer board comprised of members of the Hawaii Island community. The Mauna Kea Management Board provides the community with a direct voice in the management of the Mauna Kea. In January of this year, UH President David Lasner appointed Greg senior advisor on matters related to Mauna Kea. Greg is an associate specialist at UH Manoa, where he provides consultation and technical assistance in community engagement processes. Dr. Chun previously served as vice president of the Keaho Kahalu'u Educational Group and was responsible for the restoration and stewardship of the cultural sites in the Kahalu'u Ahupua'a. Dr. Chun received his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Hawaii. Welcome, Dr. Chun. Fritz Klasner is the Natural Resources Program Manager for the Office of Maunakea Management. He is responsible for developing and implementing management programs designed to protect and enhance Mauna Kea's unique and sensitive cultural and natural resources. He is responsible for reviewing all project proposals and makes staff recommendations to approve or not approve the Mauna Kea Management Board and Kahuku Mauna. He is currently overseeing the Ingress infrastructure project near the Visitor Information Station and the decommissioning of the Caltech sub-millimeter telescope. Mr. Klasner earned his Master's of Science degree in geography from Oregon State University. Before joining OMKM, he worked at Kenai Fjords National Park as the resource manager and served as an ecologist at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Welcome. Wally Ishibashi is our senior advisor to the OMKM on project construction. Mr. Ishibashi, a recognized and registered cultural descendant of Maunakea with the State of Hawaii Division of Historic Preservation. He traces his genealogical line to Puliahu, one of our 4 female deities on Mauna Kea. Having learned from his elders from an early age, Mr. Ishibashi continues to his cultural practices on Mauna Kea. He instills awareness and understanding about Mauna Kea's deep cultural significance with those who work on the mountain and through outreach and educational programs. Wally also assists with cultural orientation for those using Mauna Kea for cultural, scientific, and recreational purposes. Welcome, Mr. Ishibashi. Last but not least is Paul Scuddy Paiva, who is a chief Mauna Kea ranger. He oversees 10-member Mauna Kea ranger program. He and his rangers are the ambassadors for OMKM on the mountain. The rangers provide daily oversight of activities on UH managed lands, protects natural and cultural resources, provides public safety and visitor information. They conduct daily patrols between the mid-level facilities at 9,000 feet and the summit. Daily duties include emergency assistance, coordinating litter removal, trail maintenance, CDUP compliance. What does CDUP stand for?
Coastal District use permits.
Coastal District Use Permit compliance and providing visitors with cultural information. Mr. Paiva retired as a battalion chief from the Hawaii County Fire Department and commander with the Coast Guard Reserve. Welcome, all of you. We would like to start with Stephanie's presentation, please.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and thank you for inviting us to be here to share with you what we do on the mountain. Before I get into what we actually do in management, I thought I'd just present a little bit on how things got started on Mauna Kea, in particular how astronomy got started on the mountain.
Like many great endeavors, astronomy on Mauna Kea started with just a few individuals who dared to dream big. Born in 1920, Hilo native Mitsuo Akiyama graduated from Hilo High School in 1938 and the University of Hawaii in 1942. During World War II, he served in the famed 442nd Regiment before returning to his hometown to settle down and raise a family. But on May 22, 1960, everyone's lives were upended when 3 massive tidal waves leveled most of downtown Hilo. With its economic, governmental, and social hub severely damaged, the entire island suffered. As the executive secretary of the Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce, Mitsuo Akiyama was determined to find a way to rebuild the island's economy. In 1961, Howard Ellis arrived in Hilo to head the U.S. Weather Bureau's Mauna Loa Observatory. Soon thereafter, he escorted astronomer Gerard Kuiper on a visit to his observatory. Accompanying Kuiper was master telescope maker Alika Herring.
Alika used his 12-inch mirror and said they had been working over on Haleakala. And he said the viewing from 11,000 feet on Mauna Loa was much better than Haleakala. And then he said,
he was found and determined to find some economic development for the Big Islands following the tsunamis that happened in the 60s. So he was bound and determined. And so what happened was Mr. Ellis, Dr. Ellis, helped him to find some universities that Gerard Kuiper could write to ask them if they were interested in looking in terms of doing astronomy in Mauna Kea. So Dr. Kuiper actually received a letter. Mr. Ellis, Mitsuo Akiyama actually received a letter from Dr. Kuiper saying that he was interested. So that was in 1963. And then in 1964, through the efforts of Mr. Akiyama, the County Board of Supervisors, which is a precursor to the County Council, passed a resolution asking all of the elected officials from County Council all the way up through Congress to urge the facilitation of a road to the summit of Mauna Kea, and then also to actually set aside as an area for observatories. That same year, the state legislature passed concurrent resolution 16, and they asked the governor to set aside an area on the summit where they can actually put an observatory and a telescope for astronomical studies.
Akiyama was relentless in his efforts to promote astronomy on Mauna Kea. In 1964, he arranged a meeting with Dr. Gerard Kuiper and Governor John Burns, who approved an access road to the summit. By June of that year, Mauna Kea's first observations were made, and Alika Herring stated that it was the best sight he had ever seen.
So in 1964, Governor Burns had convened a committee of scientists. And Governor Burns was very visionary, and he believed that the future demand for jobs was going to be, they're going to be moving away from manual labor, from pineapple and sugar, and there's going to be a demand for technical and scientists. So he realized that Hawaii was blessed with a lot of natural resources, particularly the ocean and the sky. And so he had urged the university, the private sector, and government entities to put their efforts into establishing research enterprises in the state of Hawaii. The university being the center, and the two areas that he was particularly interested in, felt that Hawaii would excel in, was in oceanography and space science. So in 1968, the state of Hawaii entered into a 65-year lease with the University of Hawaii, setting aside what is called this Mauna Kea Science Reserve. So the Science Reserve is essentially this circular thing. This area was eventually removed to create the Mauna Kea Ice Age Natural Area Reserve. But the remainder is this 11,288 acre Science Reserve, and it's composed of essentially two areas. One is the astronomy precinct, which houses all of the telescopes except for one, which is located off the summit. Here, it's called the Very Long Baseline Array. And the other 10,700 acres is considered a cultural and a natural preserve. No development can take place within the cultural natural preserve and is only limited to the 525-acre astronomy precinct. So fast forward to today, 2000, and here we are in 2018. There are now 7 optical infrared telescopes, 2 submillimeter, and 1 radio. The northern plateau is, and I'm sorry you can't really see this pointer, is out in this area right here. So people often ask, why are there so many telescopes on Mauna Kea? Why do you have to have so many? Well, one of the reasons is that they don't all do the same thing. For example, the radio and the submillimeter telescopes observe in a different wavelength, and they can do certain kinds of science. They excel in certain kinds of astronomical research. The optical infrared telescopes, there are 7 of them, but even though they're optical and infrared, they don't do the same thing. And what makes them different is that although what is common to them is a mirror, they all have mirrors. And a mirror is only for gathering light. That's all it does. But what the scientists need are the instruments that attach to these mirrors. And all the telescopes have different kinds of instruments. And these instruments are actually what is actually doing the analysis of the light that's gathered by their telescope. And these instruments can be swapped out depending on what it is that the astronomer is looking at or looking for. Now, all of these telescopes are working. There's one telescope, the CSO, Caltech Submillimeter Telescope, which is currently being decommissioned. Another telescope is the Hokukea Telescope, which is this tiny little one here. And that has been identified as to be decommissioned. It is part of the University of Hawaii Hilo Educational Telescope. But all the other telescopes that you see there, plus the VLBA, which is located off the summit, are all working telescopes. There are no, what'd you say, non-functioning telescopes. So what happened was after the university outcompeted very large, very big name institutes to put the first telescope on the mountain, NASA actually gave the university a grant to build the first telescope on Mauna Kea, even though the university didn't really have an astronomy department. But they built the first one in 1968, and following that, when other countries and institutes realized that Mauna Kea was a good place to do astronomy, they approached the state through the university to put a telescope on Mauna Kea. And they did this. The state says, well, if you want to do that, you'd have to build it and operate it at your own cost and your own risk. So it didn't cost the state anything to build these and operate the telescopes. But what they did was, okay, in exchange, you have a sublease, and yes, it's $1 a year, but you have to give the state, through the university, viewing time on all these telescopes. And as a result of that, they got guaranteed viewing time on all the telescopes. It then resulted in the University of Hawaii becoming a top-notch school for Institute for Astronomy. So they are one of the best-known institutes in the world for their work in astronomical science. As a result, with all of the clusters of telescopes on Mauna Kea, it is also the nation's center for astronomy, as well as the center for astronomy in the world. Another reason why do we have so many telescopes? Well, what makes Mauna Kea unique is the clustering of these telescopes on the summit, and it allows them to be able to coordinate and cooperate on a very more efficient basis than having telescopes that are separated by hundreds or thousands of miles. And a good example of that is what happened several years ago when there was a Nobel Prize that was awarded to a team of astronomers that developed a theory that the universe was expanding at an accelerated rate. And that team of scientists actually used the telescopes on Mauna Kea for part of their data. And what happened was it required the cooperation of these 3 telescopes. One is the Canada-France telescope here. And Canada-France, what they did was they did surveys of the sky. And when they discovered a supernova, they then would inform the Keck telescopes and the Gemini telescopes. And then they would focus their telescopes on that particular supernova. And because they do different kinds of analysis by their instruments, they were able to add to the data that contributed to this Nobel Prize winning theory. Another example is, I don't know if you recall, there was an object that was discovered earlier this year, and it was named Oumuamua by the Hawaiian Language School with their help. And it was actually on Haleakala. The Pan-STARRS telescope on Haleakala noticed this very weird object and they realized it wasn't something that was really from our solar system. So they notified the telescopes on Mauna Kea, and they were able to quickly focus their telescopes on this particular object. It was only in our solar system for a few weeks, and once it just disappeared. And they realized that this object was not from our solar system. And it also opened the idea that there were probably many other visitors or objects that were entering our solar system that we probably weren't aware of. And it's a very unusually shaped piece of celestial being. So what is the impact of astronomy to the state and the county of Hawaii? There was a study that was done by the University of Hawaii, UHiro, and they looked at how was astronomy impacting the economics of the state as well as the counties. So for statewide, the economic impact is about $168 million. Of that, $91 million of that impact is felt on this island, on the Big Island. And that is based on about $88 million in direct expenditures statewide and about $56 million on the island of Hawaii. And then that represents about a generation of about 1,400 jobs in addition to what the telescopes, those that are employed by telescopes, and about another 800 jobs here on the Big Island. There was a study that was done by Wallet Hub, and they looked at the growth of STEM jobs. And STEM jobs are science, technology, engineering, and math. And they realized that their analysis was that STEM jobs were going to grow at a rate of 1.7 faster than non-STEM related jobs. And so in an observatory, and in addition to that, they looked at where the various metro areas in the country, how they ranked. And Hawaii ranked near the very bottom in terms of STEM growth-related jobs. So at Keck, the way it breaks down at the Keck telescopes, about 80% of the jobs in their observatory are STEM-related. Scientists is a very small group. Most of them are technicians and engineers. So you don't have to be an astronomer to work at a telescope. Most of them require all of the ancillary types of work that are done by technicians and engineers. So another thing that observatories do is they contribute towards workforce development. And one is a very successful program called the Akamai program. And these are students from Hawaii, either born in Hawaii, going to school here or on the mainland, or you are attending school in Hawaii. And they actually work hand in hand with observatories or other organizations here in Hawaii, such as NELHA and HELCO. And they work together very closely with these individuals at these facilities on real-life projects. It's not just, they don't just give them something to play with, but they're actually working on real-life projects to solve some real-life questions. So about over 350 college students have participated so far. 87% of them are still in the science and engineering field, and already 100 of them have successfully obtained a science and engineering job here in Hawaii. Another program is called the Maunakea Scholars. This was established about 3 years ago, where schools, high school kids from the Department of Education, they actually work with graduate students from the Institute of Astronomy, and they develop research projects, research proposals. They compete among each other, and then those who have the award-winning proposals, these kids get to have time on the telescopes. And they actually work on some real interesting projects. Some of them have actually produced a journal article. It started off with a couple of schools and is now expanded to 12 schools statewide, Kauai and Lanai being the newest to be added to this. But Kealakehi, Honoka'a, Waikea are schools here on this island that participate. And these kids are very, very energized and very excited about participating and being able to have time actually on these telescopes. It's very difficult for an astronomer to get time on a telescope. So prior to 2000, the management of Mauna Kea was actually done from Oahu. It was not managed from the Big Island. And in 2000, the Board of Regents approved what is called the 2000 Mauna Kea Science Reserve Master Plan. And it called for, in that plan, for community-based management. It established the Office of Maunakea Management, which is dedicated to management of the university lands on Mauna Kea. And it also established 2 volunteer groups, the Mauna Kea Management Board, which is made of 7 members from the Big Island community, as well as Kahuku-Mauna, which is made up of members from the Native Hawaiian community. Both of these groups advise OMKM, and Kahuku-Mauna advises Mauna Kea Management Board on all things Mauna Kea. All projects have to be reviewed by these 2 groups before they can move forward. They help us to establish policies, and they also review projects. So another thing on the master plan is that it set development restrictions. No development can take place, as I said earlier, in the cultural and the natural preserve. All development is limited to the astronomy precinct. No development can take place on an undisturbed pu'u or cinder cone. It must use existing infrastructure to prevent additional harm or impacts to undisturbed land, as well as calling for the recycling of existing sites. So in other words, a telescope that currently exists, if it were to go down, can be recycled. The only exception to this is the 30-meter telescope, and that's going out in this northern plateau because one, it's too large to be placed on the summit, and and in the northern plateau, the current site is that it doesn't. There are no archaeological sites there, and it is not very. It's not vecubug habitat. It's not an environmentally sensitive habitat. Another thing of the master plan is it calls for project review and approvals. So all projects must be reviewed by Kahuku Maunakea Management Board before they can move forward. For a major project such as a 30-meter telescope, it has to follow a set of design guidelines that are covered in the master plan. Then there is also another group of volunteers that's part of a design review committee, and these are made up of technical members from the community, and they all serve as volunteers. They review the design to make sure that they comply with the master plan goals and objectives, and also to help reduce the impacts of the project. Kahuku Mauna Kea reviews and makes a recommendation to approve or disapprove, and is forwarded on to the Chancellor, UH President, and then on to the Board of Regents. The 30-meter telescope was the first to go through this process. Prior to that, all the telescopes had currently existed on Mauna Kea at the time the office was established in 2000. So in the TMT, many of the recommendations that was made by the Design Review Committee and reviewed by Kahuku Mauna and Mauna Kea are incorporated in the 30-meter telescope. And the last thing I want to talk about is administrative rules. The impetus for rulemaking came in 1998 when the state auditor says, university, you need to do rules to prevent additional harm to the resources. And so that authority, we realized we didn't have the authority to do rules, and so it took us 5 years before the legislature gave us the authority to promulgate rules, and that was given to us in 2009. The rules specifically governs public and commercial activities. And also the rules, the law that gave us that authority says that our rules have to be consistent with the Department of Land and Natural Resources rules because we are completely surrounded by DLNR lands. So you could literally have 1 foot in DLNR lands and 1 foot in the university managed lands. And so to prevent confusion as to which set of rules apply, they need to be consistent. Okay. So the purpose is about protecting the resources and ensuring the health and safety of those who visit the mountain. And I know there's a lot of concern that was expressed by the Native Hawaiian community, but the rules help to ensure that those who wish to exercise their traditional cultural practices have the access to the mountain to do that. There's a constitutional right that says Native Hawaiians have the right to exercise their traditional cultural practices. But the Constitution also says that the state has a right to regulate such activities. The university's rules do not create any additional rules. Our rules reflect those statutes and rules that are already in existence that the university, by its lease, has to comply with.
Let's hear it from Wale Ishibashi, and let's have him explain his role as the senior advisor to the Office of Maunakea Management. Thank you, Wale.
Aloha mai kako. Aloha. Thank you so much. Special blessings to all of you for taking the time out this evening. And Kalamai, if we offend anybody this evening, please forgive us. It's never our intention. It's a very hot topic on the mountain, and we want to make sure everybody understands what we're up to and what we're doing, trying to be as transparent as possible. I'm going to talk a little bit about culture on the mountain. Born and raised in Kiokaha, Evaliko Street on Kiokaha. We was the first family dislocated and had to be relocated to Paneeva. So we was the first families that kicked out of Kiokaha and we set in Paneeva. And we kind of angry that we were kicked out of Kiokaha, but that's our home now, Paneeva. So that's one whole thing there. I retired from the ILW, International Longshore Union. I was business agent. I negotiated all the contracts along the coast with all the hotels. Never thought I would be working up here. 1965 was my first time up on a mountain with my tutu. And we always go up to Poliahu. It's our pu'u up there, where we always go up. And learn from an early age all the way up until now. Every year we go up there and pay our respect, but report. We have to report what's going on in our family. We have to report of all the children that was born and ask for special consideration when they go and grow up. And we still do that today. So talking about heritage, my grandpa's from Minoli. That's the Pohina's family, and we from Kaohi. That's our Kukuyao Ranch. We were all cowboys, Ishibashis, from Kukui Haile all the way up to Kalopa Mauka, all the way up to Kukuyao Ranch to the top of Mauna Kea. We were cowboys, the family, but we raised horses. We trained horses for Paka Ranch and Kukuyao Ranch. So that was our history of growing up on a mountain. So my grandpa guys was always up on the Mauna, driving cattle over to this side, the west side of the island. So that's my genealogy ties up in the mountain. So the entire mountain is deeply connected to Native Hawaiian legends and spiritual beliefs. And hundreds of significant archaeological sites and historic properties are present on the Mauna. Access for cultural practices. Contrary to what you're hearing around there, it's 24/7 you can go up. As long as the road is open, due to the weather, not being snowed in, you can go up, you can practice, and cultural practitioners can do whatever. We don't specify what you can and cannot do culturally. Every family had their own kuleana, their own way. So I'm not trying to teach you my way or convince you to practice your culture my way, and I don't expect you to teach me or advise me how to practice your culture in my family. Every family had their own kuleana on the mountain and wherever you live. That was your kuleana. Kaukumauna does not dictate to anybody want to come up and practice that they have to do things certain. No, that's not. We would like to know where you're at, or for safety reasons only, that we'll be able to help if anything happens up there. Our rangers is always on the mountain, willing to support and help any practitioner on the mountain. So that's the clarification we wanted to let everybody know. We don't limit culture practice up there. And we don't determine how you practice your culture on the mountain. So like Lake Waiau, they talk about putting your picos on Lake Waiau inside there, but get different locations on the mountain where you would deposit your picos also. It wasn't only on Lake Waiau. So here we have the pu'us, some of the main pu'us on the summit region, which is Kaohi, the district of Kaohi. And this is Kukaha'ula, this is the summit, the top. Then you have your Pu'u Poliahu, that's your snow goddess. And Pu'u Lilinoi, this is our goddess of the mist. And we have Pu'u Waiau, our lake. All of these are water goddesses, and the importance of water is there's no life without water. So that's the importance of having all of the goddesses in charge of different forms of water. So Mauna Kea is a wahipana, a celebrated and storied place in the cultural traditions of Hawaii. It's with your Papahanao Moku, our Earth Mother, and Wakea, our Sky Father. So that's the history going up on the summit. So when you're up there, we ask you to realize that you are entering as a guest when you come up to the Mauna. And you should shift your focus. Any negative things you have, you leave it down on the bottom at HP as you acclimate. So you have to look and focus from ourselves to the surroundings. So it's about the surroundings when you go up there. And you have to appreciate the opportunity to visit this special place on the Mauna. It's very special. And we ask you to respect the off-limits areas, because we have areas designated, you cannot hike, you cannot walk around because you're going to damage the landscape or the habitat for vacuum bugs. So just respect that. And important also is noise, keeping the noise down to a minimum. That's what we ask. Historic properties on Mauna Kea. Historic properties are any property or site that is over 50 years of age. And like our Halipohaku cabins and our shrines. And in the NARS area, we have our Ads Quarry. So these are our historic properties that are over 50 years of age. Here we have a map of our science reserve, our astronomy precinct, and the NARS area, Natural Area Reserve. So all of these are 50 years of age or more. So you have this red line, you can see the red lines going around. That's your historic district. So that whole circle is considered an historic district. And each individual site, there's over 330 sites over that we monitor on a yearly basis, different sites around there, and monitor, make sure that it's not disturbed. Sometimes due to erosions, we have some EVs be exposed, so we go up there and re-intern that with the State Historic Preservation Department. It's way out down Makanaka side, way on the outskirts. So we monitor all of these sites on a yearly basis, and that's part of that. We have just as many find spots. Find spots are less than 50 years of age. It's more new sites that are up on the mountain. And those are also monitored. So there is a legal protection of historic properties. Hawaii law protects all historic properties, including historic districts, from any alterations without a permit. Okay, so call up Fritz, and I'm available to answer questions later.
Wally, if you do have questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to write them. We have some index cards at the back. Raise your hand if you want to write them your questions down, and Laura or Candy will hand them to you. Our next speaker is Fritz.
All right, thank you. So Stephanie talked about the sort of background and history of astronomy and the master plan. I'm going to talk more about what's called the Comprehensive Management Plan. This was approved by the Board of Land and Natural Resources back in 2009. And the University Board of Regents accepted responsibility shortly thereafter. The management plan, as it said, consists also of 4 sub-plans. There's a natural resource plan, a cultural resource plan, a decommissioning plan, and a public access plan. I'm going to focus mostly on the natural and the cultural side of things. Stephanie talked a bit about some of the astronomy and the decommissioning side of it, and Scotty, up after myself, will talk more about the public access side of it and public safety especially. But the CMP, as we like to call it, it includes annual reporting to the land board. All this information is out there, publicly available, and feel free to ask us about it, and we can point you to it for use afterwards. One of ways we organize this is various research and surveys or inventories that have been done over the years. There are, in the cultural realm, Kepa Mali did a oral history and archival study. It's a 2-volume, several hundred pages in each volume that's really useful. We get requests from the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory as they're trying to figure out the culture, how the cultural traditions intersect with the volcanic history of the mountain. This map that Wally showed the whole area, the science reserve, as well as the natural area reserve, the Mauna Kea Ice Age Natural Area Reserve for context, so you can see the relative density of historic properties or cultural sites within the NAR area versus the science reserve. They're obviously in both, but there's many more in the natural area reserve. And that was several years of work. On a natural resource side, we've done a variety of biological projects, physical resource projects, a total of 24 different projects that we've done, sort of research and inventories on arthropods, on the vegetation, on invasive species, wildlife, or climate monitoring, sort of coming up with better climate monitoring system, permafrost, and we'll talk about some of these today. And here's just a few photos examples from these. So in terms of programs that we do, sort of the recurring thing, because one aspect, that research and the inventories are sort of understanding what are the resources that are there. But obviously things don't stay the same. Things change over time. They change for a lot of different reasons. Historic property, the state law defines historic properties as sites that are over 50 years old and meet certain significance criteria that are spelled out in the law. So we have a burial treatment plan that encompasses the entire Mauna Kea Science Reserve, not just certain areas, but it applies to all the known or suspected burials. Most of the burials that Wally referred to are suspected. No one's ever gone in and looked, and no one has any intent to. If it's suspected as a burial because of its physical shape, its oral traditions, we treat it as if it is a burial. And then we do regular monitoring. Every year we go out. There are over 300 historic property sites. We don't go to all of them every year. We have a rotating array that we go to on a rotating basis. So we hit a portion of them on any given year. And again, those generate annual reports that go to the State Historic Preservation Division for review and approval. We've been doing vacubug surveys since 2002 on an annual basis, trying to characterize the habitat, figure out how to restore the habitat. We've been doing annual surveys of other species beside other arthropod species since 2007. We have an invasive species plan that includes inspections and monitoring of facilities. And we did a botanical inventory that covered the entire science reserve and all areas within sort of a sampling plan over the entire science reserve, but all areas above 13,000 feet in elevation and within a set distance of the roadway. I forget off the top of my head, but a couple hundred yards within the roadway. And then we also, and a lot of this is the rangers, but we do this through the community groups. We remove invasive plants, and especially in areas where they're facilitated by movement of people. The stuff that shows up with spread by the wind is next to impossible to stop just by hand pulling or something. And as was brought up before, the CMP compliance, those conservation district use permits, the road, the facilities all have a permit associated with them, and the rangers do annual monitoring of each of those permits. Just a little more in-depth as an example. So that upper right map is the summit region. It's a Google Earth image. Back in the TMT environmental impact statement, I believe this illustration was used. That showed cinder cones where we had captured vacubugs. The dark green are where we had captured them. The light green are where we had suspected that they would be, but we had never captured them there. The lower left map, the color-coded, it's roughly the same geographic area. It's a relative scale, low to high, blue being low, red being high. Now we have much better, much more detailed habitat map. We know that the north aspects or south aspects are better. Certain rock types are better for the vacubug habitat. And then you have the population trend, which you can see there in the lower right. The population of the vacubug, it's highly variable. That's a common feature of insects of this nature in this type of habitat. One year might be a great year, the next year or two might be bad years, and then you get a couple of really good years again. 2017 was a good year. 2018 was the second best year we'd ever had, but who knows what 2019 will bring. But we continue to monitor on an annual basis. Another example of some of the work that we've done, back in the late 60s, a gentleman by the name of Alfred Woodcock, who was with the University of Hawaii Geophysical Institute, discovered permafrost up on Mauna Kea in Pu'uveku, the summit cinder cone, and inside of Pu'uhaukea, which is now in the Natural Area Reserve. He only found permafrost inside of cinder cones, not on the outside of cinder cones, and only on the northeast facing slope of the inside of cinder cones. So if you think about that, it's what's shaded from the sun, so it's almost always outside of the sun. Pu'uveku is the one he had mapped best back in the 60s. He mapped it, the lighter colored area there, so for scale, I'll use the mouse because I think it'll show up. No, it's not showing up. So that's a person right there. That's a person right there. There's a line through here. There's another person. That's basically like a TV antenna cable. It's doing something called ground penetrating radar. There were two sort of non-intrusive techniques. One's ground penetrating radar, sending a radio signal into the ground and looking at the reflections back, and you can identify the surfaces. Water reflects different than ice, than rock. Moist rock or moist soil. And then there's another electrical version that's basically a weak electrical current, a car battery that does the same thing. You can see that by area, the area of permafrost has decreased by half in the past, 40 plus years, but it's also shrinking from the bottom. It's melting from the bottom just from the natural heat in the earth, and it's melting from the top. It's a sign of climate change. So we're sadly watching permafrost disappear from the mountain, but there are also habitat implications. It's a source of moisture for insects and other wildlife up there. Not so much on Mauna Kea, but it also provides stability to the ground, and then it holds things together. So it has implications for the stability of this northeast or the south slope of the Pu'uveku, the inside northeast facing slope, and similarly in Pu'uhaukea. But really, when it comes to these sort of cultural and natural resource management programs, what often gets lost from my perspective is the fact that it's really about people going out there and trying to understand the effects of our changing planet and the impacts that we have. This is a photo of two of our former employees. Darcy Yogi on the left in the safety vest started out with us as an undergraduate intern. Summer intern. She then, after she graduated, she worked for us for several years. She's now working on her master's degree at UH Manoa in the Natural Resource Environmental Management program. Tisha, who's laying down, actually looking for insects in that photograph. This is hand searching. She's not taking a nap. She's looking for insects. She was an intern with us starting at Hawaii Community College. She was studying at Hawaii Community College, worked for us for a while. She's worked for various organizations in Hilo. She's now, I believe, with the Kohala Watershed Partnership, if my memory is correct. We have other folks that have gone on and gotten their master's degrees. There's a gentleman that went, works for a geophysical mapping company out of Colorado. But basically, this is all almost overwhelmingly all local high school. Both Darcy was from Oahu. Tisha's graduate high school in Hilo. Local kids that would go up, help get some experience on the mountain and move on and figure out what they want to do with life. Some of our interns have gone on and gone to pharmacy programs or into nursing programs too, and that's just fine, but it helps them understand what's up there and it helps us as well. Otherwise, just some management examples to talk about. We've been working with the Pakaloa Training Area and the Department of Defense. One of the management actions in the Comprehensive Management Plan is to look into cleaning up old aircraft wrecks. Mostly these are old military aircraft that were crashed decades ago. They were cleaned up at the time, but when the process of preparing the management plan, one of the instructions to the university was go back and look into the possibilities and come up with a plan for removing it and see if it's worth doing. So we've been working with PTA to identify all these, figure out what to do. We've got invasive species management plan that was mentioned before. We recently did a review of that. We've been doing things, we do things like inspect vehicles that come up, and we had a graduate student take a look at what we're doing and evaluate it. He looked at the vehicle washing, what's done in the facilities in Hilo and Waimea. He identified that you find ants, which are, any ant you see in Hawaii is an introduced species, and there's no ants above Halepohaku on Mauna Kea, and we're really trying to keep it that way. If you look at Haleakala National Park on Maui, they have ants at high elevation, and it's a real problem, and we don't, and we're really trying to push it, to keep it that way. But for the vehicles that follow our procedures, only about 10% of the vehicles have ants on them when they tested them in Hilo. For the vehicles that don't follow our procedures, he found ants in them about 60% of the time. So it's a pretty dramatic reduction. It's not perfect, but there is probably, in many of these sort of resource issues, there's no perfect answer, no matter what it is. But simply following our best management practices for invasive species, which all observatories, all the commercial tour companies are required to do, it greatly reduces the presence of invasive species. And he also recommended some additional baiting to prevent that from getting worse. As was mentioned in the introduction, we also do, we have this visitor information station ingress-egress improvement. This building is going to disappear. That building will disappear, and a parking lot will go in its place. It will address some, but not all of the parking issues at Halepohaku at the visitor information station. It will allow for a much safer parking situation instead of having people parking on the opposite side of the road, walking across in the dark without street lights, it'll put all the parking on the same side, provide a designated pathways to walk up into the visitor information station. And that will hopefully get going here just after the New Year's. But really, so all this work that we do when we communicate it, there's a variety of ways that we get the word out. These are report cover examples from our cultural resource program. There are sort of that gray literature agency technical reports, whether it's the vacuum bug or cultural resources or permafrost. There's the peer-reviewed scientific literature that goes into the scientific journals, gets evaluated by peers, get formal feedback, and we revise the programs based on the public comments from the scientific comments that we get on peer-reviewed. We distill that kind of information into things like the brochure, which is the brochure this is the poster and the back side of the brochure that you have tonight, so it's available in these sort of summary formats. We have a Mauna Kea speaker series once a month. Actually, this next one is a week from tonight in Hilo, at UH Hilo. They're recorded. Dr. Grant Garish, who did the botanical inventory that I mentioned before, will be talking about his botanical survey work. We have a newsletter that gets out electronically. This is Ku'upua Kiuna. She was interested in law when she interned with us. She actually helped review the draft administrative rules at the time for consistency with the requirements of the state statute and comparing them to the DLNR rules and say, which is was a requirement of the rules, so that we had that evaluation. And then really, as a community management group, we go out to the community. We work with school groups, we work at community fairs, there's things like Astro Day in the mall and in Hilo and in Kona, but we also go to quite a bit of schools over here, Kealakehe Elementary, we've been to Waikoloa, a variety of Hilo schools. And that's really working, we've had a Mauna Kea Art Festival, things at Imiloa, science fair projects, on the mountain and mentored by some of the staff and the faculty that we work with. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scotty for a few minutes.
Thank you, Fritz. And if you guys want to see this information again, it will be available on our website at www.westhawaiiforum.org. So we are at the top of the hour. I know we have a couple more speakers to go. So Scott, I'm going to give you 1 minute. I'm just kidding. If you could please keep yours short, because I know Dr. Chun still has a few minutes of presentation to do. And then again, if you have questions, please write them down, and I will gladly ask them for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'll just go over the highlights of our Ranger program. Our main focus and goals are resource management and health and safety of our visitors. We do daily patrols, and through our patrols, we generate reports. And through those reports, we have several databases. One important database that we look at a lot is vehicle counts. We count all the vehicles that go up to the summit, whether it's observatory vehicles, visitor vehicles, or the commercial operator vehicles. We interface with visitors. We try to be very proactive and go out and engage and meet our visitors. The different things that we try to communicate with them is, again, health and safety. And you'd be surprised that the things we see up there. One of the health and safety issues that a ranger just talked to me about the other day, he was down at the Viz, and he saw a gentleman with his own portable O2 oxygen with nasal cannula walking around asking questions about going up to the summit. So he convinced the person that that wasn't a good idea to go visit the summit with his medical condition. Also, we talk to people who are driving their own vehicles. A lot of visitors are operating their own four-wheel drive or rental four-wheel drives, and they don't know how to engage the four-wheel drive or drive the four-wheel drives. And we also have a lot of people in two-wheel drive vehicles that we try to educate them on how to safely drive down and navigate the road coming down using low gear. Try not to use too much brakes. If you feel like you are using your brakes, pull on the side, check the brakes, let them cool off. We also educate on the significance of Mauna Kea. I already talked about health and safety, how to safely visit, and also how to visit respectfully. Wally had mentioned, no horseplaying, try to keep things quiet, no alcohol. Now we have a new UH law, no smoking. We're also the first responders on the UH managed lands. That's from Halepohaku up to the summit. And we also assist the county when they request on the road going down up to Saddle Road. We pick up trash, and I'm very proud of our rangers. If you ever go up to the summit, notice how clean it is. Our rangers do a heck of a job policing up after people. And unfortunately, people are people, and we have a lot of trash that we need to collect. And remove invasive plants. And one big plant that we're really concerned about and put a lot of focus on is fireweed. And fireweed is that yellow flowery plant that sometimes looks real beautiful down Waikiki, but it's actually a very invasive plant. And we do semi-annual inspections of the observatories and the facilities at Halepohaku to make sure that they're in compliance with their permits. And thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Scott. And now Dr. Chun.
Okay, thank you. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we all know Mauna Kea presents, as well as some of the things that the university is doing to try to address those challenges. I think the 2 points I really want to make is that the management of Mauna Kea, the job that these folks do, is way more complicated than anybody can imagine. That's number one. Number two is, if we're going to fix the problems of Mauna Kea, it's not a UH thing alone. It's going to have to be a community thing, because there are things that impact the larger context in which decisions and planning is occurring that are not in our control, not under the university's control, but which greatly impact the Mauna. There are a lot of people who have suggested they have the answer to fixing Mauna Kea. If we would just get the administrative rules in place, we're working on that, but the university has been criticized about not having those rules, taking so long to get those in place. If we would just get the comprehensive management plan in place, it took years to get that in place because we had to get authority to actually develop the plan, and now it needs to be updated. The master plan is coming up on expiring 2020. We have to update that plan. If we just get the right master plan, then everything will be fixed. University of Hawaii is seeking a new land authorization, a new master lease. We're going through an EIS right now. Some people will say, if you just get that, then everything will be fixed. We've had alternative plans put forward, the governor's 10-point plan, and Mayor Kim's own initiative. And then we have a bunch of things happening on the litigation and legislative front, which in my experience has been, we will never litigate nor legislate our way into a better solution. Okay? So the point here is that a little bit of what everybody is talking about is what's required to ensure that we address all of the concerns and we ensure the future of Mauna Kea that we hear people talking about. There is no magic bullet. We have to, whoever was responsible for managing Mauna Kea would have to address all of these things and more. I've been involved with Mauna Kea since 1999. First on the periphery, then now as chair of the Mauna Kea Management Board. The one word that consistently comes up is balance. Everybody wants to find balance. Balance between all of these multiple values that we share, that come into play. These are some of the values that come into play when it comes to Mauna Kea. I would propose to you that this same Venn diagram could apply to any of a number of other projects that we struggle with in this state. The challenge becomes, okay, everybody wants balance, that sounds nice, but the more of those values you have that you're trying to balance, the smaller PICO gets. Okay? And that would be true for, and again, this would be true for anyone responsible for managing Mauna Kea. The other thing that makes it difficult is that we all operate in this state in an ecosystem of public discourse that does not allow us to talk with each other. We talk at each other. While Mauna Kea is what we're here to talk about today, again, I think this ecosystem applies to almost any other major project where we have conflict in the community. At the core of any major project is some group who has experienced either a real or perceived injustice. Don't misunderstand me. There has been a grave injustice expressed against Native Hawaiians with the overthrow of our nation. But you can also substitute, depending on the project, a real or perceived injustice that some people feel that might be the growing racial divide that we're experiencing in our communities, the growing economic disparity that we're experiencing in our communities, the growing educational disparity that we're experiencing in our communities. Those problems are really, really tough to fix. So what happens is that those problems get played out in the venue of these projects, TMT, Hokulia, geothermal, GMO, rail, you name it. At the core of every one of those things, I would submit, is a real or perceived injustice that needs to be addressed. But they get played out in these projects, which are all played out in these adversarial processes. They're not set up for helping us talk to each other to figure these things out. They're set up for somebody to get an approval for a permit or an application or a zoning change or whatever the case may be. And all of that is occurring in this growing sense of distrust in our institutions in the country. This isn't just unique to Hawaii, okay? So this is the ecosystem that we're supposed to solve these problems in. And it's true for anybody who, this would be true, the context that any entity responsible for Mauna Kea would be facing. So how do we move forward? One of the things that we need to do is correct some of the narrative that's out there. We have heard that the university has been negligent and we're leaving a whole bunch of money on the table because the only thing the state gets out of a $1 a year sublease that we charge these observatories is observing time. Well, the calculus, and if you hear that enough, you start to believe it. The calculus is way more complicated than that. Yes, these observatories get a $1 a year sublease, and as Stephanie pointed out in her remarks, that $1 a year sublease requires them to make the investment in building these observatories. We went back and we calculated what's the collective investment, capital investment, since the building of the very first observatory that's been made over the years, and we normalized it to account for inflation. So it's about $1 billion. Okay, that's an investment this state, as Stephanie says, this state would never have made on its own. With that investment comes about $89 million in annual expenditures in terms of their budgets, their collective budgets statewide. So that $1 a year sublease gets leveraged to all of this investment as well as this additional annual spending. And this is what we get. Yeah, we get observing time. And that observing time leverages, allows our Institute for Astronomy to bring in about $15 million a year in grants, much of which goes to paying university overhead. They're considered a top 10 program in the world. They produce just a range of intellectual capital. We don't have time to go into all of it tonight. I recommend, if you ever have a chance to sit with Doug Simons, he has a wonderful presentation that talks about the educational value and impact of astronomy. Shared management costs, all of the observatories pay a portion of their budget, okay? Those have led to recognized stewardship programs. The programs that Fritz talked about have been recognized for their highest levels of quality. Public access. That investment allows the university, allows these folks to grade and improve that road twice a week so that the public can get up there. You talk to the kupuna before there was a road, it was very difficult to get up there. About 14,000 jobs, as Stephanie said, $168 million of economic impact statewide, 91 million on this county, in the county alone. And all of that value chain allows us to pay ceded land revenues as well into the Ceded Land Revenue Trust Fund. So when we talk about the calculus of how all of this works, you have to understand how integrated this value chain is. And so if you want to start to pull it apart, you need to understand what's at risk, because these things are highly intercorrelated. For those who may question the value of astronomy on the mountain, this is a graph showing, I forget, I think it's 20 or 25 observatories across the world. And they measure their impact based on in the academic world, they measure impact of your work based on the number of articles and how those articles are referenced across the world. So you're not going to be able to see it clearly, but all of those red bars are Mauna Kea observatories, okay? Every year that changes because the number of studies coming out of a given telescope observatory changes all the time. But clearly, the complex up there is producing some of the best science in the world when it comes to astronomy. 4 of the top 7 are in Mauna Kea. So let's understand the facts and how it all works. That's number one. Second thing is, let's go make sure we're hearing the people that aren't being heard in that ecosystem, okay? So one of the things the university did, and I would say nobody else has done this, is that we sponsored a project, and some people in this room helped us with it, called Envision Mauna Kea. That project was specifically focused on going and hearing what we called the soft voices, the voices that were not being heard in the community. Okay? I won't get into the design and how we did that, but it was an extensive process. Met with and got feedback from about 130 people across the island. We didn't ask them if they supported TMT. That wasn't the conversation. The conversation is, what is your hopes and dreams for the future of Mauna Kea? Because that conversation wasn't occurring. The report has been issued. You can go to www.envisionmaunakea.org. You can download the report. I'm going to highlight just a few of the main things we found. Everybody to a person said the Mauna is special. It's sacred. When you peel the onion, though, what you begin to hear is that sacred is not sacred is not sacred. It's not the same thing to everybody. For some people, the Mauna itself is sacred, so that what it means is that there should be no human activity on the summit. For other people, they say it's sacred precisely because they are able to go there and experience the divine that they are not able to experience in their everyday life. We talk to hunters. To them, it's sacred because it's a place they can go and feed their family. We talk to artists. It's sacred because it's a source of creative inspiration for them. The one thing that's common amongst all of those definitions is that there's an expectation that when you go up there, whether it's for astronomy or your own personal reasons, you act a certain way. So we're taking that input, and we're trying to infuse it into these administrative rules and other things that we're working on, because this input was very, very important that we heard. There are other things that we heard that you can get into. One of the things, I'll just say, on public access, everybody says, yes, you got to reduce the number of cars and reduce the number of people going up there. Okay, great. But don't deny me my access. So how are we moving forward? A number of things. One thing is that we know we have to broaden and deepen our engagement with the community. Okay, we need to hear from more voices in our decision making. So we changed the nomination process to the Mauna Kea Management Board. So the folks that you saw that Stephanie showed are the new board members appointed based on nominations that came from a variety of community groups that the UH President and Chancellor, UH Hilo Chancellor reached out to. We're strengthening Mauna Kea Management Board access to the UH Chancellor to decision making. My appointment as special advisor is one of the mechanisms that we've done that. We have Kahukumana, and we're now bringing in Imiloa to help us with some of our educational cultural activities. We reached out to make sure that we heard the soft voices. We have a bunch of public hearings that we just completed. That input is being taken very seriously. We're making significant, or the legal term is substantive changes to those rules. So when we come back in a second round of public hearings, people will see that we did hear them. Second way that we're moving forward is that we have to innovate and expand education. One of the things that we heard in Envision Mauna Kea is that the Mauna is the teacher. Okay, it shouldn't just be about astronomy. So we're doing a number of things to try to broaden our educational reach and our educational impact. And the last thing is we're building and improving upon stewardship. A number of things that the Board of Regents and administration have done. they made the Board of Regents passed a resolution in August 2017 wanting us to commit to higher levels of collaboration with other agencies and also internally. So there's a bunch of things that are starting to happen. One of the things is UH and Scotty folks and DLNR got together and we started a program of cracking down on the unpermitted operators. There's an internal financial audit in process now that the regents have called for. We're getting ready to do a comprehensive management update. We have 2 decommissionings in process, and we now have a new model for lease payments going forward. So we can start to adjust that $1 a year sublease formula. I said that this is not just a university thing, okay? We have to understand as a community that it's a privilege to practice on Mauna Kea, no matter what your practice is. And as long as we allow ourselves to only frame our conversation about Mauna Kea in terms of rights, license, I have a permit to go up there, I have a license to do XYZ, I have a constitutional right to do XYZ. As long as that's the conversation, we're never going to fix things. Everybody has to understand that whatever you go up there for, it's a privilege to be there. That's got to be the starting point. Okay? And one of the things we need to do, not just at the university, but in all decision making when it comes to Mauna Kea, is that we have to shift our focus. No longer can Mauna Kea be seen or looked at as a science reserve that just happens to sit within a significant cultural landscape. Mauna Kea is a significant cultural landscape that just happens to be the best place in the world to do astronomy. When you ask yourself that question from the get-go, you ask yourself different kind of management questions down the line. So, that'll be.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen. How about a big hand to all of our panelists? So, community forums produces and develop these monthly forums, educational forums, so that we can be better informed as a community. And I don't know about you, but every time we have these forums, I personally learn a lot. It's a learning experience for me each time. And of course, we want to thank all of our panelists for being here and for providing us with all these wonderful information. So I have a few questions, and I think this first one, Stephanie, you might want to come down here, and this has something to do with a map. So can you show on the astronomy precinct map which facilities are scheduled to be dismantled and where the TMT would or could be built? Maybe while Stephanie is trying to find the map, I can ask this next question. And this is probably for Wally, maybe. Why were those cultural practitioners who have been most active in protecting Mauna Kea in the courts directly consulted on the proposed management rules when they were initially being written? Is this something that you would you could answer, or is this a Greg question?
Well, this is for the rules making?
The rules making. Why were those cultural practitioners who have been most active in protecting Mauna Kea in the courts directly consulted on the proposed management rules when they were initially being written?
Rules were initially drafted in 2009, and so there's a whole bunch of consultation that occurred then at that time. Then they were put on pause for a variety of, quite frankly, political and legal reasons. So that's why they never came forward from the initial draft. So when we got the go-ahead from the governor to bring them forward again, the consultation with, the rules had not changed since the original draft in 2009. But we went out and we did consult with OHA and we consulted with DLNR and got their more recent input, and then we took them out. I think that, you know, under the ideal situation, you would have started, you know, consultation and had it move all the way through all at one time. But because of that delay, things really got kind of broken up, and so we lost that continuity. So on the question of were they consulted, yes, consultation occurred way back in 2009. Right now, what we're looking at with the new draft that we're developing is actually doing some additional consultation before we actually do a second round of public hearings. And so not just the practitioners, because there are a lot of people who weighed in on those rules. We want to have some informal consultation before we actually take them back to the rules.
Dr.
Take 'em
Chen,
back to hearings.
I have a follow-up question for you. I know in September you guys hosted a series of public hearings to get input from the community. So you mentioned there's a second round of public hearings then, so people can still provide input?
Yeah, because based on the input, the testimony that we received, because we are making substantive changes, we have to go back out with a second round of hearings.
And where might they find this information, the schedule for additional public hearings?
It'll be announced once it gets scheduled. All of that will come out through the university and Office of Maunakea Management.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, getting to this map, I hope you can all see this. So the question was, where is what was the question?
Which facilities are scheduled to be dismantled and where the
Oh, okay.
TMT would or could be built?
Okay, so let's see. It's kind of a small picture, sorry. Okay, yeah. So
You don't have to come down here too. You can just-
this one, this is the Hokukea. It has been identified for decommissioning. It's it's an action that's still before the Maunakea Management Board. They asked that the University of Hawaii Hilo do additional consultation before they actually approve this notice of intent, because they didn't feel there was enough consultation done. Because there was a group of individuals who came forward and said they didn't want this educational telescope to be decommissioned. Okay. The other one is this one here. It's the Caltech submillimeter telescope. They lost their funding, so they have not been operational for a couple years, and they are going through the decommissioning process, which was described in the decommissioning plan that the Board of Land and Natural Resources approved. And it's kind of a long process because it does require a lot of studies, in some studies, and they have to do an environmental assessment, and they have to apply for a conservation district use permit with the Department of Land and Natural Resources. But it also involves consultation with the community as they move forward. So that's currently being done, and probably will not be, after it goes through all its permitting, they may not be able to start commissioning the physical decommissioning until maybe 2020. And the telescope that was put in there several years ago, the mirror was cracked, so they couldn't use it. So they did try to purchase a new telescope, and when they purchased that new telescope, that's when it was identified for decommissioning, so they have to find another location.
Okay, and so, but every other telescopes there are operational?
Correct.
Except for that one?
Correct.
Okay. And
the Caltech, those two are not operational.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then they are set to be decommissioned?
Caltech is going through the decommissioning process, and
Okay.
Hokukea has been identified for decommissioning.
Okay, and so staying on that topic of decommissioning, here's another question. Who is responsible for decommissioning? And if it is owners of the observatories, what is the assurance that they will have the financial resources to decommission?
Okay, so Caltech is responsible for the decommissioning of their telescope. Now, if the UH Hilo one, actually Hokukea comes down, then the University of Hawaii is responsible for the decommissioning of that particular telescope. Now, all of these telescopes were built before a decommissioning plan was put into place. They were all there before our office was established in 2000. So all telescopes going forward, and any telescope that renegotiates their sublease, will be required to have a decommissioning plan. So when they go forward, they will have to assure that there is going to be funding available at the time they decommission. So TMT has a decommissioning plan, and they will be putting $1 million into a fund. So by the time they decommission 50 years plus years from now, they will have sufficient monies to execute their decommissioning.
Okay, so but before we talk about decommissioning TMT, let's talk about where it could be built on the mountain.
Okay.
That was the first question.
Okay, so here's the astronomy precinct, okay? And TMT is going to be out here near the boundary of the astronomy precinct, out in what is called the Northern Plateau. It is off the summit. It's about 500 to 600 feet below the summit proper, and it is in an area that is not archaeologically sensitive or environmentally sensitive.
Okay, and related to that, I guess your question is who is building TMT and where is it being manufactured? I know it's different parts, right? Different parts are being built different places?
Correct. TMT is actually a consortium of Caltech, California System, University of California System, Japan, China, and India and Canada are all partners. And mirrors are being produced in, I believe, China, Japan, and India, with the final polishing be done in the United States. The dome is being manufactured in Canada. That's their specialty. And as far as I know, the Japanese are going to be responsible for building the pier in which the telescope is put on.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's another question, and this one is on the draft rules. The draft rules include a subsection noting the proposed chapter is subject to the right of Native Hawaiians to exercise protected customary and tradition rights. Could you elaborate on the rules that protect Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices? And I think Wally talked about this earlier, but do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, Wally?
Well, and again, we don't determine how to practice your culture. Yeah, we don't determine how you practice your culture. So it's up to the individual's house. So we're not trying to limit access. But you have to be able to notify us, when you're going up, so we can help secure you and make sure you're safe when you're going up. So we're not there to have watch over you what you're doing. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make sure that you're safe when you're up there. When you go up, you enjoy yourself and you come home. That's more for the safety reasons. So that's all we want to ensure. Cultural practice continue and maintain. We want them to come up. We want them to exercise their rights. But we want to make sure it's safe.
Thank you. And this next question is probably more for Scotty, that this is regarding managed road access. And this is part of the draft administrative rules. Can you explain more about managed road access?
The purpose of the rules is to protect the resources and to ensure the safety of those visiting the mountain. So if, for example, let me give you an example. When we have snow days, we have hundreds of cars, and sometimes they park alongside the road, which only leaves one lane available for two-way traffic. And that means that we can't get an emergency vehicle up to the summit in case something were to happen. And there are accidents that happen on the mountain, not so much from vehicular, but there are actual accidents from individuals who are engaged in snow play. So that is obviously a very dangerous situation. So the rangers, what they try to do is to ensure that we have safe access for emergency vehicles and that we have individuals to enjoy their stay on the mountain. They have to limit the cars so that we're not blocking the road. So they establish a one-way road, one-way pattern on the summit so that individuals aren't parked all over the place, because we don't have delineated parking spaces on the summit.
Right.
So to keep the traffic flowing, they have a one-way pattern. And if they they try to prevent people from parking alongside the roads where there is only a one-lane road. So they do limit the number of cars on those kinds of occasions, but it doesn't happen a whole lot.
So on an average, how many cars go up the mountain on a daily basis?
On a daily basis? That's a really good question. I know more of it on a, yeah.
Oh, it's seasonal.
Right now, we're kind of on an off-season, so we're averaging about 70 to 75 vehicles, private vehicles going up. And at sunset, we're having about 50 up there per night.
Okay. And that's a manageable number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
And I do need to mention that most of the vehicles that come on a daily basis are tourists.
One of our issues is it seems like they say it's good for jobs, but the jobs are not coming to island residents. They're coming to people from the outside.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't really have that figure for you, but I do know that the observatories prefer to hire local people. And the reason for that is that when they have to hire from the outside, a number of them, for whatever reason, don't stay because their spouse can't find a job or they can't handle they miss the seasons that they have on the mainland and their family's far away. But the challenge that they were having is that they couldn't find the skilled individuals here in Hawaii, and so they had to look outside. And so this workforce development that is currently going on is that the observatories have a website. If you're looking for a position, you can go to this website. They sort of coordinate their efforts. And then TMT is putting $1 million every year towards workforce development. And they want to start that now so that when they are fully operational, that there'll be enough local individuals to be able to work at their facilities. And they all prefer, as I said, to hire local people because it's very expensive. It's about $250,000 to actually bring someone here, train them, pick up their moving costs, and then for them to leave. And so it's not cost effective for them to bring in people from the mainland.
Correct. The current lease is until 2033.
Yes.
The area must be restored to its original condition. So in regards to that, taking into account TMT's footprint, and I'm talking about the excavation that is going to take place, how can this be done?
The whole mountain is sacred. The whole mountain, it is. It's a very special place, and I respect that. And I want to maintain that recognition of the area. So yes, it is sacred. So in regards to the TMT, I don't quite understand that question, but I wanted to put one point out on the TMT. There is a project labor agreement that all construction work on the island will be done by local labor unions. So that's one labor agreement on that point. So it's being built around the world, but everything going to be shipped here, and then our people going to build it. Now at the site, you're talking about restoration after?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct. Well,
Yeah.
I'm asking if there's the size of that excavation, how can it be restored to its original condition at the end of the lease?
Well, as close as possible as part of the decommissioning plan that they have to restore the site. So we're working on the CSO right now is the first telescope that's going to be decommissioned. So we're looking at the different scenarios, 100% restoration, 80%, get different phases. And that's all based on what the people, what we do with that restoration. But right now you got to restore the site. So the money is already appropriated, all the different telescopes setting aside money should that day come of decommission, that we have enough funds to restore.
Stephanie, do you want to add anything to Wali's remarks?
The decommissioning plan has 3 scenarios. It can restore a site to its original state, which we all know is probably not possible. So as much as possible to its original state, or it can be restored to just a more of a limited, and there's call it's minimal to the max, to full restoration, to minimal, to something in between. Okay, but that is going to be determined through community consultation. To what degree does the site need to be restored? So it's not just the University or the Telescope themselves making that decision. It comes from the community to make that.
Here's a question, you can keep that. Here's a question about estimated TMT impact as far as jobs and scientific impact.
It's hard to estimate what that scientific impact, but we do know that if TMT is built and becomes operational, it'll be able to see much farther than any of the telescopes that currently exist. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't make the current telescopes obsolete, because every telescope has a certain function.
Right.
Okay. But the TMT would be able to go back in time. That is what it was built for. That's why the size of the mirror is so large. It can go back to when the universe was created. So scientifically, that's hugely valuable. But you can't put a dollar figure to that.
Right.
Okay. In terms of jobs, I'm not quite sure exactly or what the job creation would be from TMT, but in the back of my mind, going back to the EIS that was published several years ago, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400 jobs.
That's
But then
local
don't
jobs.
quote me on that.
Local jobs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Chen, you have anything to add to that? Okay.
As a community forums board member, I have just one thing to add is that TMT also donates funds to local nonprofits, correct, for educational outreach and STEM.
Right.
Yeah, so that goes towards building programs where we can have future, our students here in Hawaii will build those skills, that they can have those jobs and they can fulfill those roles someday.
So two programs. One is that they're giving $1 million every year for STEM-related education for the Big Island only. And the other one is $250,000 of those funds goes to the Pauahi Foundation for only monies to be used for Native Hawaiian students. The other $750,000 is for the general population on the island for education. The other one is $1 million for workforce development. And this is where they want to be able to provide opportunities for the kids today to have to be able to develop their skills and experience. So not only for TMT, but for all the other observatories or for other companies here on the island that requires high-tech skills.
Not everybody can be scientists, so our day shift crew is your technician, that's your mechanics, that's your day crew. The night crew is your scientist. So the day crew is our local people. I get telescopes that is run by Kilcar residents, Hawaiians. You know, it's working up there. So it's two different crews, the scientific one and the technical, the hands-on labor guys. So there is jobs out there for our people.
So earlier Fritz presented different plans that you guys have. There's plans for everything essentially up on the mountain. So here's a question about plans. Are there any plans to simplify access permits and activities along and on the access road? There are several entities in charge of different areas. Is that a Fritz question or a Stephanie question?
Can you read that question again?
Are there any plans to simplify access permits and activities along and on the access road? There are several entities in charge of different areas.
There is no permit required for accessing Mauna Kea.
Okay.
Right, but we are surrounded by DLNR lands, and that's why the law that gave us the authority to promulgate rules says our rules need to be consistent with DLNR rules, because it would be very hard if, like I said, there are political boundaries but they're not physical boundaries. So you could have 1 foot on DLNR lands and 1 foot on UH lands, and the question is which rules would apply. So if they're consistent, then you don't really have the problem, okay? So most of our rules actually are DLNR rules. They're just incorporated into UH rules. So there's no permit required for accessing the mountain. Anyone, if you're a Native Hawaiian practitioner or if you're just John Q. Public, you can go up to the mountain anytime, provided the road is open. The road is closed when they have inclement weather, if there's snow or ice on the road, or it's very foggy and it's a very dangerous situation. So did that answer the question?
Did that answer your question, France? No. Access and activities.
Okay, so, if you want to engage in an activity in the mountain, you can engage in that activity, provided that activity is not going to harm the environment. So you can't go out there and start digging, for example. And you can't, there's certain activities that we prefer people not engage in. For example, Kahukumana had asked that individuals not hike up to the top of Pu'uveku, which is the highest point in the summit, but it's a culturally sacred site for them, and they don't want individuals, primarily like tourists, go up there and just to want to be able to climb the highest point in the mountain. But so they ask, there is a sign that they ask individuals to not hike up to the summit of Mauna Kea. To provide respect to the Native Hawaiian host culture.
France, did that answer your question? Okay. I think this next question is for Dr. Chan. How were soft voices established or determined, and what were the guidelines for selecting those soft voices?
Anybody in the community who wanted to participate in one of our talk story sessions, all we asked them to do was to let us know. We had a website, because these were not intended to be public hearings. These were not intended to be places where people are going to get up and give testimony. They were intended to be conversations. So each of the talk story sessions ran for about 2 hours. If you indicated that you wanted to attend one, you were just invited to the next available one. We did intentionally reach out to certain groups to ensure that we had broad representation. We reached out to the hunters, we reached out to the artists, as I indicated. We had many groups that were mixed, and we reached out in various ways to the protectors. And for whatever reason, only one group of protectors decided they wanted to sit with us. So we also reached out to students in Kupuna. We had sessions in Kohala, Kamehameha schools in Hilo. We had written submittals from 6th graders at Honoka'a Elementary, and we had written submittals from college students as well. Every group answered the same question, which was basically, what do you value about Mauna Kea? So it wasn't about, as I said, it wasn't about TMT or astronomy or UH. It was about the Mauna and what they wanted to see. So we did our best to try to get a representative sample. We did have a few loud voices, but most of the folks who went through the process and participated were very thankful. In fact, I remember the first group that we had was a Kupuna group. And at the end of the session, one of the women, one of the aunties said, I can't have this conversation at home. I can't have this conversation with my friends. It's the first time I've been able to talk about how I feel about this whole thing. And that's what it was intended to be, was to create safe places. But we didn't go out and select, oh, we want this person and this person. We had broad ideas that we wanted to get some representation, but anybody could have come.
Thank you, Dr. Chan. We are about 5 minutes to 8, and I have a couple more questions to ask, and this has something to do with what is the Office of Maunakea Management's definition for the word original. Relating to this question, should anything that is considered sacred be defaced to be restored?
Well, I don't know how to answer the first one. I don't know, Greg, do you?
I can read a definition. I can read a definition of original, if you would let me.
Sure.
What dictionary is it from? Okay, we got this from a dictionary.
That is considered sacred.
The word original, present or existing from the beginning, first or earliest, the original owner of the house. Synonyms, indigenous, native, aboriginal. Can you read this word right there? Auto. I can't read. Okay, she can't read it either. It says autochthonous, or that word. First, earliest, early, the original inhabitants.
Thank you. Should anything that is considered sacred be defaced to be restored? And I think this was somewhat answered by Wally and you earlier about the decommissioning and how it can be restored to its original form. Did you want to elaborate more, or no, Dr. Chun?
I think Stephanie said it, that, and excuse me, I forgot your name, Chris. You mentioned it, that it's very difficult to get it back to an original physical state. You try as much as you can to get it as far as you can. But if the question is, how do you restore a sacred site because it's sacred? Right. That's why it was so important for us to go out and hear what how they defined it. And if you go and you read the report, you'll see that there wasn't a singular definition of what sacred meant. Mm-hmm. 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 So inherent in your question or in your comment is, should there be any kind of activity? Because any kind of activity has the potential. I mean, I can just walk up there and I could be doing something that someone feels is desecrating the aina, right? And that's why it was really important for us to find out how people were defining it. And that definition is not consistent. What was consistent was everybody who goes up there for whatever purpose needs to understand, as Wally talked about, how you act when you go up there. So that's what we're trying to do and address through our rules. Yes?
I'd like to suggest something. First of all, anybody knows anything about nature knows that nothing is static. The mountain's going to change even if we don't ever go there. Number two, you've restored it if somebody comes by years later and can't tell you were ever there. Because you can't put back every pebble, you can't put back every weed. It's going to change. But if you leave it so that it returns to its natural state, not its natural details, you restore it.
Thank you very much. And we have So we have arrived at the end of our forum. So our panelists will stay for a little bit, and if you have additional questions, please come up and ask them. We want to thank our panelists again, Stephanie Nagata, Dr. Greg Chun, Fritz Klasner, Wally Ishibashi, and Scotty Paiva. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to all of you for staying till the end. And again, if you have friends and family who want to watch this forum, it will be available on our website, www.westhawaiiforum.org, and it will be aired on Aleo TV in about a week or so from now. So thank you again for being here, and have a drive safe home.
Akiyama was relentless in his efforts to promote astronomy on Mauna Kea. In 1964, he arranged a meeting with Dr. Gerard Kuiper and Governor John Burns, who approved an access road to the summit. By June of that year, Mauna Kea's first observations were made, and Alika Herring stated that it was the best sight he had ever seen. Like many great endeavors, astronomy on Mauna Kea started with just a few individuals who dared to dream big. Born in 1920, Hilo native Mitsuo Akiyama graduated from Hilo High School in 1938 and the University of Hawaii in 1942. During World War II, he served in the famed 442nd Regiment before returning to his hometown to settle down and raise a family. But on May 22, 1960, everyone's lives were upended when 3 massive tidal waves leveled most of downtown Hilo. With its economic, governmental, and social hub severely damaged, the entire island suffered. As the executive secretary of the Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce, Mitsuo Akiyama was determined to find a way to rebuild the island's economy. In 1961, Howard Ellis arrived in Hilo to head the U.S. Weather Bureau's Mauna Loa Observatory. Soon thereafter, he escorted astronomer Gerard Kuiper on a visit to his observatory. Accompanying Kuiper was master telescope maker Alika Herring.
Alika used his 12-inch mirror and said they had been working over on Haleakala. And he said the viewing from 11,000 feet on Mauna Loa was much better than Haleakala. And then he said,